this is already really nice, and I like the chord changes they've got going on here. Oh shit. Super reverby drum hit. And then they kind of pulled it back. There's some nice like counterpoint choices happening here. This pacing in the drums is... I was gonna say, this is about to... Really nice writing. Really liked that that duet in the two high voices. That was just really nice writing. It feels like it's calling on really nice kind of like counterpoint choices. Counterpoint is kind of one of the foundations for modern Western music theory. I can talk more about that if it's interesting to people, but yeah, that's just really lovely. That was a very traditional little melodic motif with the chord choices they made and the harmonization choices. Yeah, just really satisfying resolutions to some of their melodic lines there and harmonizing it in a way that felt really like traditional in a really nice way. Is very, very solid choices. I like these little like textural things happening that are kind of placed a little bit wide in the... Okay, so there's a really, really fun violin technique happening in this part that just came in, which is where I can get a little bit more highly technical, because there are some instruments that I'm like, I'm not going to touch what technique is happening there because I am not an expert in this. But this violin technique, we're basically like running the gamut of all of the strings here. So it's this really wide sweeping bowing that's happening. You're actually holding your fingers, most likely. I'm obviously not looking at the violinist here, but you can hear from the bow texture that's being created here that we have this kind of really wide sweeping bow movement, which means that we're holding our fingers down in a chord and then going lowest string da 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 da, and kind of sawing back and forth. And that's how we're spanning a really wide pitch range there on the violin, and also how you get that kind of like airier texture to it. So I'll try to point it out. What's the... It's also one of the most fun techniques to play. When you get to a point where you're comfortable with that kind of bowing technique, it's just such a joy to play. So it's always fun to hear people work this in, because it is a little bit more of a I would say this is a technique that requires a certain amount of like intimate knowledge of violin techniques, or at least string techniques. You can do it on other string instruments as well, which is really cool. It's always a joy to be like, this is kind of like starting to dip a toe into the like extended techniques realm, where instead of just being like, play these notes and maybe slur them, we're starting to think a little bit more about like, what textures can we get with a bow, which is awesome. And I like that it's a backbone of this section, because it also allows the violin to frame chords in a way that you wouldn't if you weren't doing this kind of technique and crossing a lot of strings. Ooh, really nice piano texture there. I really like the amount that we haven't kind of processed out the textures of these instruments. You can feel the strings of the guitar. Nice. It was interesting. Very unexpected chord to arrive at for that little piano moment. Really interesting pulsing happening that's like very dull. It adds like a really interesting urgency. I like that descending line on the fiddle. There is something interesting I'm finding about this, which is there's a lot of... Let me go back. I want to hear this. It's interesting to me, the violin is only like sounding with vibrato on like the high notes, and the lower notes are like pretty flat, in not flat like below the pitch, but yeah, it's a really interesting, like there are some notes that are like there's a vibrato, really pretty fast vibrato, and then some of them don't really have any, which is really interesting. Vibrato is the wiggliness that you're hearing on those notes, the wah, 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 when it feels like there's this little like happening on some of the violin notes. That is where you're holding a violin like this and you actually move your wrist in a way that allows your finger to do a kind of like minute movement on the string that actually shifts the pitch a little bit. So that's what you're hearing here on some of these notes. But that's what's really interesting, is that which notes are being have this kind of vibrato technique added to them is that was some fun lines. Fun. That's interesting. They're kind of doing this kind of duet between a violin and electric guitar, which I think is something that a lot of people would shy away from doing, because um the presence of a duet like that, when one of them sounds acoustic and the other sounds electric, can sometimes like mess with your perception of the size and scale of the instrument. I think a lot of people would really want the guitar to come in and be smashed through everything else. And so it's kind of a really interesting and more restrained choice to have it come in and then keep this duet going, which I don't know, I think that's a fun. And yeah, they're also giving priority to the guitar and the violin in different ears. I liked that little violin line. Yeah, I mean, this is all really interesting because, again, like, there are sometimes risks when you're doing this kind of writing. Like, having a violin stay in for that amount of time, the violin is usually going to be at the top of the register. If it's doing this kind of really high-pitched solo work, there's usually not going to be anything above the violin. And high-pitched sounds will pierce through a lot of the mix, which means that the violin is really, like, kind of dominating. Unless you're careful, the violin is a pretty dominating instrument in its high range, because it is just going to be piercing. And so having it kind of sustain this solo line and then bringing back in choir is really, I would say, like, in some ways breaking convention of what you would, it's one thing to have like violins playing like a repetitive ostinato up high or something, or like a soaring chordal thing. Um, but it's creating this kind of like duet feeling to whatever else is happening underneath the violin, which I think is a really interesting choice. And it feels like there's a lot of this kind of like two voice interplay that they're going for in this piece, which I think is just makes it interesting. That was really nice. Really nice writing. Just really nice melody writing. I also really like the difference in vocal textures. So there's one that's like at kind of a half scream point where there's this kind of textural interplay. Awesome writing in the low strings. Very cool. I really liked it. There's some details in there too in the that final section that is such a deliberate choice, which is that some of the entrances and exits for some of the voices and strings are not perfectly lined up. And so it has this kind of live performance feeling where it feels like you're watching them sing in a circle and be looking at each other for cues. And it's not a computerized feeling where it's like, nope, we lined up all of the entrances to be right here together. It feels like they're all kind of like, there's a rawness to that choice, which I think is really, really pretty and a really lovely choice for the ending of that track. Cool. That makes me very curious what the rest of the soundtrack sounds like. So we'll have to do more of those.